Welcome back to the Aussie Shed, ladies and gentlemen. Today we start on some piping. We'll have a bit of a crack at the intake piping to the turbos and the charge pipes to the intercooler, and possibly some other bits and pieces thrown in along the way. So if you're interested in all that kind of stuff, and not just specifically for this vehicle, but general, how to do piping and all that kind of thing, mate, sit back, grab yourself a beer, put your feet up, put some music on or whatever so you can't hear your missus nagging at you in the background, and hopefully this video will entertain you for a little while. So, let's get into it. It's a stinking hot, muggy night in the Aussie Shed tonight, ladies and gentlemen. Probably still about 36 degrees Celsius, I reckon. I worked all day out in the sun today, 42 degrees it was, and I'm absolutely rooted. But, that's not to say I don't still have enough drive to work on my project in the Aussie Shed. So my brain's pretty scrambled from the heat today, so I figured I might just attack something fairly simple. I can just sort of plod along in the shed in the heat, put the fan on, and just chill out. So I thought I might do a bit of intercooler piping on the front here. I'll run you through the intercooler while I'm at it, folks. This intercooler here, it's actually two coolers welded together. I bought these cores from Treadstone in the US a few years ago and just welded them together and made some brackets for them. They've got cast end tanks on them. They're pretty reasonable as far as cast end tanks go. They're not a bad cooler. A lot of guys use them in the US and have put a lot of power through them, and they seem to hold up pretty well. So like I say, all I've done is weld them together and then make the brackets up on the end here to mount them to the front chassis rails there. So I did that a while ago. I put it on the car the other day and I thought I might potter around and start making some piping up and whatnot. So what I'm doing is I'm doing the two penetrations in the top, which goes through the original intake for your air boxes, which is just here. And I'm just sawing those out so I can fit some 2.5 inch piping through them. The outlets on the coolers are all 2.5 inch, 2.5 inch on the top, 2.5 inch on the bottom. I'm going to be putting a 90 on here, but this won't be going into there because it has to kind of dip down slightly. So I'll bring a bit of aluminium pipe through there, probably with a 45 and just dip 45 or a 30 and just dip it down into this. So I've just cut the leg off this 90-degree silicon coupler. When I'm cutting silicon couplers down, I like to use these Stanley long-bladed knives because you can mark the coupler and then you can just push the blade through without having to pull the blade back out, which gives you a stop-start position. You can just kind of saw your way along your line, and they work really, really well to give you a really neat cut. That's what I do anyway, folks. Everyone has their own methods on all this sort of stuff, but I've used quite a few different things over the years. Bloody hacksaws, I've tried putting them through the bandsaw, all sorts of stuff. Other sharp blades, but these seem to be really good. Oh, I always use a new one because the reinforcing in the silicon does tend to blunten them in a reasonable amount of time, but you can do pretty decent cuts with it. So for me, bloody good alternative. So what I've done to get this hole so neat in here, folks, I'm not sure if you can see that too well on the camera there. I'm only looking at a fairly little screen here, so it's hard for me to sort of see too much detail. But this is quite neat through here. I've seen some pretty rough and ragged bloody jobs on things like this, but it's really simple to do a neat job. Like most things, you just got to kind of have a bit of a crack at it. So first of all, you just get a coupler and just mark around it with a texture. Even black on black, you can still see it because it's heaps shiny. Like I say, I'm going to be bringing pipe through there anyway, which is a little bit smaller than the coupler. So using the coupler gives you a little bit of room for clearance. So you just mark around it. And with all sorts of plastics, I generally just use a Dremel to cut it with. This bit that I've got in the Dremel here looks a bit like a drill bit, and it's actually for cutting plastics with, and it works extremely well. You can even plunge cut with it. So you just fire your Dremel up and either stick it in, or you can even cut through an edge by just going at it on the side. It's got really sharp edges on this thing. It'll cut through stuff sideways, and then you just kind of guide it around your cut, just really slow and really neat. It's pretty easy to control. Things like this are generally a little bit hard to control, but this is fairly easy to control. Maybe I just find it that way because I've done quite a bit of this stuff, but on the grand scale of using these style of cutters, it is a fairly easy thing to control. So generally any plastics that I have to cut holes through or anything, I'll either use a hole saw if I can get there, or if it's somewhere where I can't get in with a hole saw or it's a bit of an odd shape, I'll just use this. And then what I've done from here is I've used my my old Milwaukee die grinder, which I use a bloody hell of a lot, just with a, I don't know, probably a 3-inch flat wheel or something in it, and then just clean up the hole with the flat wheel like so. And obviously the bigger the flat wheel, the reason I'm using a wheel this size is the closer the wheel is to the size of the thing that you've got cut out, the easier it is to do a good job. If you're using a really small standing wheel, it's really easy to make divots and make it uneven, but a big wheel makes it very hard to fuck it up. So just sort of go through it, cut it out, then clean it up with this, and you end up with something that's really, really nice. No sharp edges, no dags. It's just, you know, real easy to do. I've just got a bit of masking tape on the outlet of the intercooler here. These outlets are really, really sharp on this particular cooler. Yeah, they're really super sharp. This is really sharp. If you just put the coupler on with it like it is, it'll pretty much cut into the coupler. It works like a 400 series hose fitting. It just kind of cuts into the back of the hose and you won't be able to slide it off. So generally I just give them a little, anything that I come across like that, I'll actually give it a little bit of a touch with a file, just to smooth the back edge of it off a bit. Look, it'd be really good if you were putting a shit ton of boost through something and you absolutely, you know, we're doing your absolute utmost to try and stop hoses popping off, but that's not going to be an issue for me. So it basically just makes it a huge pain in the ass when you are when you're setting things up on a build. When you're dummying stuff up like this, it's all right if it's you know, if it's part of a kit or something that's already kind of sorted and you're just assembling it and it's only got to be done once. But mate, everything I do on this thing is on and off bloody 20 times before it's sorted. And if I didn't do something to correct it, it would just cut the hoses to pieces. And then I'd be screwed. I'd have to buy more hoses. Now the aluminium Mandrel bends that I'm using on this piping, where are we? Okay, here's a piece here. This is just 2.5 inch, 45 degree Mandrel bend. They're bead rolled on the end pretty badly. They're just a Chinese thing, but there's a positive to them, and let me show you. So if you're doing any piping work, I would advise you to buy one of these Chinese piping kits. There are sellers that have them in containers in Sydney. Obviously they come out of China, but you can get them within a few days. That's a ring in, that's just an offcut that I've thrown in there. Let's save that. There's a few other pieces in there, but it's these guys here that are wrapped in the plastic. They also come with couplers and T-bolt clamps. The T-bolt clamps are pretty good. The couplers are, nah, some of them are alright, like, depends on what you're sort of doing with them, but you're lucky if you kind of use 50% of the couplers. Even that, I generally tend to use the minimal amount of silicone couplers that I can, and for those I will often buy high quality couplers just to be sure everything's going to be fine. Like I say, the ones that come in these are fairly thin, but they are alright. I've never really had any problems with them, but then I haven't really used them that much. Like I say, the T-bolt clamps are pretty good. The bends, mate, the bends are all, you know, they're pretty nice really. I've got no problems at all with them. 180s, the kits come with 2 180s, 2 45s, 2 90s, and 2 straights and a shit ton of couplers, and I think they come with 8 couplers and friggin' 16 T-bolt clamps, and they're, what are they? I think they're about 130, 140 bucks Aussie, and when you're looking at about 40, 50 bucks a bend, it adds up pretty quickly, and I just find these to be super cheap and be pretty good. So there you go folks, bit of a tip. Mandrel bends, buy a kit. Even if you only use half of them, it's not going to cost you any more than buying individual Mandrel bends, and you will have spares for later. Like I say, the bead rolling job on them is okay. it's certainly passable. Better than trying to use straight pipe that's not rolled with and welding little friggin' dags on it that I've seen people do, and then have pipes blow off when they've got their cars on the dyno and stuff. Fairly close to my bead roller. I just made a bead roller. It's just a sort of a nothing thrown together out of a few bits of aluminium, but that's the job that my bead roller does, and that's the one that comes with them. You can see it's fairly similar size. Mine's a little bit more defined, and I think the end of mine is a little bit better, but they obviously have a big machine that they put them in, but certainly passable. The main benefit to this stuff is it is all bead rolled, but I very rarely ever use any of the original bead rolls because I just use the pipe as just a raw material really. So I just cut them and chop them and weld them wherever I want and just roll a new bead on them wherever I need to. I'll give you a quick squiz at my my DIY bead roller. Now I made this up a few years ago just out of some aluminium. There's a couple of bearings in here. I didn't make this up on the lathe or anything like that. I just used a drill press and hand tools and a welder. The Mandrel that I'm using here to form the bead, it's a bolt with an offcut of stainless that was cored out of something, which you could just use washers for if you needed to, and weld them together or whatever. And then up in the top here, the sort of receiver for the bead shape, it's just a bearing that I bought off eBay that comes with a like a recess in it. It's for sliding doors and tracks and things like that, so it'll run on a track. But it's just a cheap bearing. And it's pretty good. And this is your adjuster. You just wind that down. The bearing's just held into this piece here. It's got a nylock nut on the back, so it allows it to sort of slide up and down. And yeah, that's your adjuster. It's just there to clamp down on the tube. And then on the back here, you just put a 13mm socket on it and just turn him around. Like I say, because there's bearings in here, it doesn't kind of get tight or anything. It works pretty well. I'll throw it in the vise and give you a bit of a look. That's it there, sitting in the vise. Like I say, you just wind this up, put your pipe on there, and you just butt your pipe against the flat part of the aluminium there, and just wind this down till it's a little bit snug, and then just start going around it with your ratchet, and you can see it turns the pipe as it goes. You just start putting a little bit more pressure on it each time, and it doesn't take long, folks, and you've got yourself a nice bead roll there. I've seen people use vice grips and all sorts of things to sort of crimp a bit of a bead roll in and everything, and they all sort of work, but they're not very neat, and they don't do a very even sort of a job. For something that was super cheap to make up, you know, even to buy a piece of aluminium like this on eBay isn't probably going to cost you more than 20 bucks, and all the other stuff, cheap bearings, bits and pieces, just sort of bolts and, you know, nothing fancy anyway, folks. That's all I'm getting at. It's not something that's beyond the scope of your average DIY to make up in their garage, and it gives you a nice, comfortable bead. I might even give this thing its own YouTube video, pull it apart and give you sort of an in-depth look and instructions on how to make one. Let me know in the comments section if you'd like me to do a video on my homemade bead roller. If it's something you guys would be interested in, I'll pull it apart and I'll make a video on it, just so you guys can knock one out yourself rather than spending a heap of dough buying one. And like I say, it works really, really well, as you can see from the job that it does. Anyhow, back to the car. So what I'm currently doing, folks, is I'm just trying to work out what angle I need and the position to bring these pipes through to get them in the proper line to join onto this 90. So what I think I'll do, folks, I'll just slip a straight coupler on the end of this. That'll give me the point where the pipe and the coupler intersect. Now while I'm here, I happen to have a couple of straight couplers with me to show you a bit of a comparison. The one with the blue lining, that's one of the ones that comes in the Mandrel bend piping kits that you buy that I was just talking about. And this one here is just an Aeroflow jobby that I've got here in the shed. Now you can see the difference in thickness, and I'm putting about the same amount of pressure on these, and that's the difference there in how much they kind of flex due to that that thickness issue there. The aeroflow is about 5.5, 5.6. Yep, 5.6, 5.7 around there. And these guys, mate, 4 mil if you're being generous to it. Yep. The thickness does tend to vary a little bit more with these things as well. So it was sort of 5 in that spot, but 4 in this spot. 3.9. Yeah, they do tend to vary a little bit in their thickness. So, like I was saying, folks, you get what you pay for. These things, I very rarely ever use them. They're only good for low boost on a budget system. If you want something a bit more substantial, just buy more of a quality silicon coupler. These Aeroflow ones seem pretty good. I've used a lot of these and never had any problems with them, but they are a lot more expensive. 2.5 inch straight coupler like that's probably 20-30 bucks, and the big ones, you know, 90 degree long leg jobbies are like 50-60 bucks. Whereas these things, you just, I don't know, you get heaps of them in the box. I've got boxes of them and I just kind of chuck them away in the end. But anyway, they're here for stuff like this, which makes them sort of valuable in one way. You can use them for dummying stuff up and not have to worry about things like I mentioned before, like the sharp flanges on the intercooler cutting the silicon piping. So you can just shove one of these guys on and then just use it to sort of help with alignment and stuff. So I'll show you what I'm doing here, folks. You can see as I slide forward, it just gives me a position where the two intersect, and I am going to be putting a 90 degree silicon coupler on here, so it's going to go around and then up the pipe. So ideally I want this section of the pipe here to be straight, and the only way I can get that to happen and also to have the intersection in the right place is if I go to a flatter angle on the pipe. So I don't think 45 is going to work here, because I need it to sort of, you know, like I say, I need a much flatter angle. I can get the intersection okay, but it means that the silicon coupler has to come up the curve, which I don't want it to do. I want the curve to be up in here, not down here. So I've got a couple of ways I can fix that. I can either cut this through the center and then weld a straight piece on it, and that'll give me two 22.5 degree pieces. Or I can just buy a 30 degree or a 20 degree Mandrel bend and use these 45s somewhere else. I think I need to sit down and just nut out a bit more of the piping to see if I'm going to need 45s, because if I need 45s I might as well keep these and not cut them up, because I'm just going to have to buy 45s. So bear with me and I'll nut out a bit more and decide what I'm going to do with this guy. Anyway, no big drama, we'll work it out. I'll just suss out a bit more of the pipe work and see what the best go is. So I've just jumped down onto the passenger side turbo here. The air intake to the turbos is 2.5 inch, which is the same size as the piping I was using up top. I know I'm going to be using a heap of bends here, so I thought I might start in here before going any further up top. That way I'll nut out a whole heap more of the bends. So you can see I've got this section done. So we'll just put a bit of an extension on here, and then there'll be a pod filter on the end of this, and this will bring it out just in the front corner, just below the headlight, in behind the front bar. It's a really good spot there. The only issue is on the other side, it's where the windscreen washer bottle is. So I'm going to have to modify the windscreen washer bottle. I honestly don't know what I will do with it at this stage, but I possibly will just make a new reservoir up out of some aluminium and have the original filler neck going down into it and have cutouts for the pipe to go through. That's just sort of an early idea that I have on how I'm going to sort of deal with that. But at this stage, you can see that pipe there, all the bends and everything are pretty good on that. I've had the body shell back down, there's no clearance issues. Yeah, it all works pretty well. Just a shot there from another angle, folks. And what I've been doing is, basically with this this cheap Mandrel bend stuff, you don't necessarily have to have the exact angles that you need. Just a bit of a tip there for young players. You experienced guys probably all aware of all this, but if you get a 90 and you cut it in half and then weld a leg onto it, onto both pieces, you've then got two 45s. And if you cut it into thirds and then weld a leg on, if you come along a third of the way the bend, then you've got a 30-degree bend and then you've got a 60-degree offcut. So you can actually work out the angles of the bends that you need, cut straight across the bend so you're not on an angle so that a piece of square pipe will join onto it, and you can basically get any angle that you want as long as it's no more than the angle that you have. Like, that's 90 degrees, obviously you're not going to be able to get 100, but you can get anything less than 90 degrees. If you wanted to straighten that out a little bit, all you do is you just cut across here and then weld a leg on. So instead of having the square corner, then you'll have it slightly out. And it's the same for 180s. A lot of these packs will have two 90s, two 45s, two straights and two 180s. And the 180s, basically if you cut the 180s in half, I'll just go and grab a 180 and I'll show you. Alright, now I don't have any 180s, I must have already cut them up, but you can imagine if you've got a 180 degree bend like a horseshoe, you cut it in the center and then weld a straight leg on both pieces, you've got two 90s. What I'm getting at is if you need a 27.5 degree bend, and if you can't get that, you can just make it yourself out of a 30 degree bend or out of a 45, out of a 90 or a 180. Anything that's over that angle, you can cut it back to the angle that you want and then just weld a piece of straight leg onto it, or do the join there onto the next section of pipe that you're doing. That's what all of these are. I think there's two 45. I think that might be a 45 and that might be a 45. But this section here, I don't know what I've cut that out of, but same scenario. The only issue that you face is with these, oh, there you go, you can see that's part of a 180. So if you were to fix that up, I've obviously cut it in a particular spot, but if you were to recut that in the exact spot there, that will give you a 90 if you weld that back together. Okay, so you guys get me, no need to keep explaining. The issue with doing it this way and not using exact Mandrel bends is a lot of the time you have to weld in a section that's been Mandrel bent, and depending on the quality of the tube and the quality of the bender that's been used, the pipe can be quite distorted in this position. So what you'll find is that when you try to mate it to a straight section, it'll be, generally these are stretched so it's a little bit large, so you don't get a perfect fit up. You tap it around a bit, use clamps and stuff to get it as even as you can, and then just weld it up, and it's not too bad. It looks a little tiny bit off. These here have been done that way. I had that issue with this pipe here on this join. This one was a little bit bigger than where this section ran into it because it had been stretched in the middle of the Mandrel bend. But it turned out alright. It's just a little bit tricky when you're welding it. But yeah, you get the idea, guys. So that side's pretty good. I'll take you over to the driver's side and we'll have a bit of a look at what I'm doing over there. Alright, you can see what's going on here. This is the piece of pipe that I'm working on. Once again, it's the air intake to the turbo. I've got a section of Mandrel bent pipe here. It's actually the other piece of this, and I think it might have originally been a 90. And it's just been, the angle's just been tuned up a little bit. And what it's set up for is to head down here and clear the alternator, clear the chassis, which is the body line comes right across here, and then the angle has to be right to meet up with the pipe where it comes through here, like the other side does. So that angle has to meet the other angle where it comes around. I may get it first go when I tack it up. I may have to adjust it or turn it or twist it. It might be good, it might not be good. It's just one of those things. A lot of the time you'll get it first go if you plan it all out properly. Sometimes you won't. It's just, you know, the luck of the draw really. You just do your best and then see what happens. You can see what I've got going on here. This is the outlet from the compressor. This pipe here will go through to the intercooler. You can see this is the outlet from the compressor housing is 50mm. So what I have here is just some 50mm PVC plumbing pipe. I don't have any 50mm Mandrel bends here at the moment. And even if I did, I probably wouldn't use them in this mock-up because I could possibly fuck them up, which I don't really want to do. Just like when I was making the manifolds, if you can use some plastic pipe, anything that's easy to work with, cheap, disposable, to help you with things. And what this is doing, this is just setting my clearance so that I can't go down below here, because like a lot of stuff, there's many ways you can do things. Like I could have turned this down, I could have rotated this angle around and dropped the pipe down on a more severe angle, which would have helped me a little bit at getting around the alternator. It would have been probably a little bit easier. But because I'm aware that this pipe has to come through in this position, and this is the only position that this pipe can come through in, having a dummy piece of pipe there to set your clearances, mate, that's the go. It just eliminates another area for mistakes that could cost you time and will make you redo stuff that you've just spent a hell of a lot of time on doing. Kind of like when I redid this exhaust manifold. If I'd have thought about it a bit more, I would have hopefully come up with this idea first time instead of having to redo it, which cost me a lot of time. But it's just the way it is, folks, with this kind of a build. You've got to expect to not always get everything right first go. And for me, the gauge of how well someone does their work is that they're not afraid to write off work that they've done because they've come up with something better. And I'm sure all my customers that I've had over the years have appreciated that aspect of the work that I do. And I don't work in the automotive field, so it's not this sort of stuff I'm talking about, but just with other things in general, you know, that's the way I approach everything. So don't be afraid to redo stuff if you make mistakes, folks. That's basically all I'm saying, because we're all human, we all make mistakes. It'd be great to get everything right the first time. But when you're doing anything like this, basically what you're doing is a prototype. Any one-off job, mate, you're building a prototype. Prototypes take friggin' ages to do. Once it's all set, then obviously you can pump out the second one in a quarter of the time that it takes, because a lot of the time involved in doing things like this is nutting out stuff, nutting out designs of things in general. Once you've got the designs right, then all you've got to do is just copy the component, piece of piss. So everything takes time. That's all there is to it. So always allow yourself plenty of time when you're doing things, folks. If you look at a job and say, oh yeah, that's going to take me 2 weeks, just double it. It's always worked for me. Sometimes I should have tripled it, but just double it, you know, and you'll have probably a more realistic time frame. So that's what I'm doing there, folks. I think I've got that in the right spot. You can see I've got a texture mark on there. So I'm just about to pull this out, put a couple of tacks on it, put it back in position, test it, and if it's right, I'll move on to this piece. I'll cut this bead off that's on here. Once I work out the position where the other pipe's going to come in, I'll cut the bead off, maybe cut it back, or I don't know what angle I'm going to use and how it's going to work, but that'll sort of define where I'm going to cut this off. Maybe even need a longer piece to join it in there properly, but for the time being, that's where I'm at on this side. I'm just about to pull this pipe out and weld her up, so bear with me, folks. And just quickly, folks, this is what I was talking about with the issue with having cuts in the middle of the Mandrel bends. You can see I've got a tack in that spot there now, and the pipe's nice and flush. I'll just see if you can see this on the camera. As I rotate it around, it looks like it's really hard to pick it up. But there you go, you can see it there. You can see the pipes sticking out over the edge here, and it's sort of under and it's back over here. So what I'll do is I'll just use some clamps, and I'll just clamp the pipe in the places where it's too fat, and that'll push it out in the places where it's too skinny. So just by using a couple of clamps and some tacks on as I go, I should be able to get this reasonably even compared to what it is now, whereas if I just tried to weld around it, it'd be a bit of a shit fight. It'd just be a little bit harder to do, and it would look a little bit shittier when it's finished. So yeah, I just thought I'd show you that, seeing as so I had the exact thing that I was just talking about. Yes, so I'll get some clamps on this. I'll get a couple more tacks on it, and then we'll just recheck it and see if it's going to work. There we go, folks. You can see I've got it's quite hot, this piece, so I'm being a little bit delicate while I'm handling it. I've just got a series of tacks around it. I've gotten the join quite even. The tacks are sort of randomly spaced. Wherever I had an issue, I've clamped the high part of the pipe together with the low part, put a tack on it, and then just kind of moved around the pipe and got the whole thing pretty much even now. All of those edges, most of them are gone, and the ones that are left are very minimal compared to what we had originally. So that's a pretty good tack up. That's ready to weld if the location's right, which I'm about to check now. We'll see how we went. It's bloody hot. Alright, that's sort of somewhere there. Does appear to be pretty good, folks. I'm pretty happy with that location. So what I've got to do now, the power steering hose is sort of obscuring my my next join, so I might just reposition the camera. Rightio, so I've removed the power steering line here, which was getting in the way of me sighting this pipe properly. You can see this is the pipe here. I've actually sighted it by just lining it up over the top of the other pipe, roughly on the correct angle that I need. And you can see that was the remnant of the 180. I've got the waste cut off it, and that's what I'm left with. Now, what I've done here is just drop this down in line with where I think I need to be, and put a bit of a mark on this straight section of pipe. Now, I always tend to do this in two cuts. The first mark and the first cut being the rough position, because I do not want to cut this pipe too short. And the first cut will give me a very good idea of the exact position. I should be within 5 or 10 millimeters of it, but I do not want to be too short. So just by sort of sighting and positioning, I think I should be okay. So I'll just take this over on the bandsaw, cut this off, put it back, and we'll take another look at it. Well, folks, this is looking really good. That's the second cut that I've made there. As I mentioned just before, I did the first cut and it was pretty close. I thought, yeah, I'll move into the second cut, and it is now really, really perfect. It's exactly where I want it to be down here, but I've since found a problem. Now that I've got that tacked, and I was about to tack this, I thought I'll drop the body back down and just double check all the clearances, because it is very, very tight in this area, like it is on the whole vehicle. Visually, I'm clear of this post here where the chassis and the body mounts together. So I didn't think it was going to be an issue, but after dropping the body shell back down, as you come up right at the point where it meets here, there's a piece that juts out on the side of the this support that mounts on there, and even though it does still fit, it's all just absolutely too tight. So I've got three options, I reckon. I can either give the body shell a couple of love taps with a big hammer and just slightly indent the area that's very close to the pipe. I can indent the pipe as well to create a little bit of clearance, or I can just remake it. It's only tacked together at this point, which is what I'm going to do. I can always do those other options later on if it's still not close enough. At least at this point I figure I can get it in a little bit closer. I'll show you from the side what it has to do. So what I've got to do here is sneak in a lot closer to the alternator. This right at this point on the bend is coincides with the exact high point on the body shell. So what I want to do is just sort of come in more, sneak in a lot closer, even though I'm almost touching the alternator here. It's this position here, so it just means making a slightly more complex designs with maybe another 1 or 2 bends in this section here to sort of roll it in and then roll it back out once it gets past this point. So I think I'll do that now. I think I'll just release these tacks and then start building some small bends in there just to sort of get myself in a little bit closer. It's probably not going to look as nice because of the amount of bends that'll be in here. There'll be a few sections, but we'll see. I'll have another crack at it. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of this stuff is sort of trial and error. Like, you do your best, you get things as close as you can. Sometimes they're right, sometimes they're not. Sometimes they need a little bit of adjustment. But the thing is, you've got to make those adjustments or you're just not really doing yourself any favours. I could just continue with this and assemble it. Like I say, it does fit. But the last thing I want to do is go to all the effort on this car and then have a pipe rattling that I just can't for the life of me fix. That just drives you crazy. Like, that would absolutely annoy the hell out of me. And I'm sure every time I took someone for a drive, they'd say, "What's rattling?" And of course, I'd have to say, yeah, it's something that I made. No, it's not going to happen. So a couple more bends, a little bit more time, unpick this, sneak it in a bit more, and then bend it back out. I'm sure I can do something better than what I've got here. And like I say, I can always sort of go at it with a hammer, give it a few love taps and increase the amount of clearance. But generally embarking on this type of thing on this vehicle, as you guys know, if you have one of these vehicles, there is no clearance for anything anywhere. You're finding the best way through with stuff. You're only ever talking millimetres of clearance. So I'll do my best. I'll unpick this, throw in a few bends, and I'll flick the camera back on and show you how it went. I think that's not too bad. Not too bad. I might just whack a bit of tape on it and then just drop the body back down. It's pretty good. The couplings are all up flush. Everything's roughly where I want it. I do think it's going to be pretty good, but we'll get the body back down and we'll get a better look. Here we go. Oh, look at that. Well, I must say, folks, I'm pretty happy with that. We seem to have clearance everywhere we need it. We've just snuck around the back of the alternator. Don't worry about that plug and cable sitting on there. I'll just have to make a slight modification to the alternator wiring because I need some of its space. But we've cleared the lump in the body shell, and at the worst point I've probably got about 10 millimeters clearance, which is oodles. You can see the pipe sneaks through there. We come back, I'll just show you where it comes out. So this is where the pipe comes out now. It needs an extension on it to get the air cleaner, but you can see where we are in relation to the car. It is that position there, so we put an extension. As you can see, it's taking up the space where the washer bottle was. So I may possibly bring it down to get it as low as I possibly can, rather than have it kind of stuck up in the middle, just purely because it'll give me the most room for another washer bottle, which I'll probably have to make. But at this stage, mate, I'm pretty bloody happy. That's kind of where I want to be. Now I'll just show you the other side. So we've got the car in this position. This is our other pipe coming out of the turbo there. Same deal, she just snakes down. There's a little bit more room on this side. We've got to wind around the AC compressor, but there is a little bit more clearance. I'm probably only got, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 mil between the AC compressor and the pipe, but that's nothing. I can sneak the pipe around a little bit to fix that. But because the intake pipe and the AC compressor are both connected to the engine, they'll rock together, so there's no kind of clash between them. And once again, you see it sneaks through there and comes through here. I don't have the inner guard on this side, so it's a little bit harder to see, but you can see that Nissan have left us this nice little gap here between the front chassis rail and the body shell, which allows you to just sneak a 2.5 inch pipe through if you come through in the right place. It does taper down as you move back to the back of the car, which you can probably see where those bolts are to the right. You can't fit the pipe in there, it has to be right at the front. You can see there is a little bit of a raised section just near where we are. So yeah, that's where that comes through, and as with the other side, we'll extend it. Once the inner guard goes back on, same kind of deal really. See where we are here in the exact same position. On this side, I don't think there's any issues with anything fouling, like there's no washer bottle or anything like that in the way. I don't think I have to be too worried about where I position the pod filter on this side, as long as it's obviously in the right spot and doesn't foul on things. But starting to get a bit of pipe in there, which is bloody great. I guess we'll get the body shell back up, pull it out and finish weld it. Rightio. Alright, I just need to do a little bit of fettling with this joint here. It's not a very good match between this bend and this bend here, just because they've both been through the Mandrel bender and they don't line up very well. So we'll get it off and do a bit of tuning up on it, and then we'll weld it all together. That'll be fantastic. So I've just finished working my way around that last piece, getting it all tacked together and trying to get it all even. You can see I've got a fairly even, it's probably 3/4 of a millimetre overhang on this pipe all the way around. It's as even as I can get it. It'll help minimise how hard this is to weld and how kind of crap it ends up when it's done. Hopefully it won't be too bad, but like I say, it just increases your chance of any burn through, because you've sort of got that exposed edge there. Anyway, it's all tacked up, so I think I will I'll start welding it. Not the prettiest thing in the world, folks, but I think it's a pretty good weld. Bit of a final clean up with some acetone. It's already been cleaned 3 or 4 times, folks, but just to kind of make sure. This is the tricky one. I've left it till last with the overhang, just to kind of get my game up a bit on the previous 2 welds. I'll just hit this with some compressed air just to make sure there's no acetone left in any kind of crevices there, and hopefully she should be good to go. tricky. Tricky. There you go, folks, all welded up. That this is the one that was a little bit dodgy. It didn't turn out too bad. Some bits are obviously better than others where it was worse. It's a bit sort of daggy here, but most of it's pretty good considering the fit up and the way it was. You can see that's obviously where it sort of fitted the best. Not sure if you can see down in there. Nah, you can sort of see a bit of penetration coming through right around the welds, but you can't really see in there. But yeah, it's not bad. Might throw it on the 370 GT and have a bit of a look. Well, I must say, it does look pretty bloody good. Damn happy with that, I think. Pretty happy. One final check with the body back down, but so far so good. I can't imagine that it's going to be a problem now. And you wouldn't believe it, folks. All my 2-inch Mandrel bends have shown up from China. So I can move straight onto the charge pipes from the compressor and bring them down and start setting them up for the intercooler. So, bloody fantastic. I'll start getting some pipes out of the box and we'll maybe start roughing this one out, seeing as so it's probably one of the most complicated ones, but bloody stoked. So I've had a little bit of time to now start on this 2-inch charge pipe from the compressor outlet. You can see I've got a bit of a bend that I've set up there. It looks like it's ended up being about maybe 10 or 15 degrees. Bit of straight pipe, couple of tacks on it, 2-inch silicone joiner, and it's roughly going down to where I need it. I've got about 15mm clearance between the two pipes. I've got plenty of clearance under here to get the oil filter on and off for oil changes. I've got this pipe all cut to length and ready to go onto here and get a few tacks on it, which I'll do right now. Alright, she's all tacked up. That's looking pretty good. I might just pop the camera off the tripod and just give you a bit better look of the whole kind of arrangement with this pipe. I'll just bring you down under here just so you can kind of see all the clearances. You can see there's plenty of room to get the oil filter off still. It'll spin off with a hell of a lot of room to spare. There's no issues. Everything's good under there. There's clearance between the alternator. There is, oh, where are we? Not sure if you can see, but there's clearance between the two pipes there. Between the charge pipe and the air intake for the turbo. They're all clear. We clear along the chassis there. The intake pipe for the turbo is very tight on the alternator, but it is clear. I can get the electrical connection back in on the alternator. It is going to be a little bit tight though, but like I say, I've already checked it all and it's really quite easy. Everything here kind of clears. I've had the body shell up and down numerous times and I've rechecked all this, so it's all pretty good. So all that I've got left to do at this stage on this side is just to finish weld that last charge pipe, and then I'll move over to the charge pipe on this side, which this side has to wrap around in behind the engine mount, sort of in through behind there and sort of come out in the same spot. Anyway, we'll get this fella welded up and then we'll move on. Yeah, I guess it's pretty reasonable. Alright for a roughy non-welder. Another wipe down, folks. You never wipe this stuff down enough, I don't reckon. Especially when you've been drawing on it and grinding it. And just, I don't know, when you're welding it, you just sort of hit bits and just go, what the fuck was that? Anyway, never mind, this will be just fine. That's that one done. Yeah, turned out pretty reasonable, I guess. Like I say, good for me anyway. There's no pinholes and there's good penetration. That's all you want. It doesn't look like it's been pooped on by seagulls too badly, which is another good thing. I'll give it a hit with a wire brush and then I'll put this in position and we'll move on, eh? Alright folks, she's back in position, all welded up. Very, very happy with that. So from here I'll move across to the other side. I'll just move the light and set up over the other side, but you sort of get the idea of how this kind of stuff's done. You always want to keep minimum silicon couplers in the system. You only want to put silicon couplers where you need to get all the pipes apart. The reason being they're the weak link in all this kind of stuff. You often hear of silicon couplers, you know, blowing apart and pipes coming off at the coupler and all that. You never hear of pipes blowing off at the welds and all that kind of thing. And that's for good reason. So yeah, keep your couplers to a minimum. Only use them where you have to. Down in this lower section where it goes into the intercooler, there'll obviously be a coupler where it joins the intercooler, and then there'll be one more coupler, whether it's on this straight section down here or whether it's sort of in the middle of the horseshoe where it wraps around into the intercooler. At this stage I don't know. That'll become quite apparent when I start building it. These things have a habit of kind of showing you the way as you're doing them. So yep, so far so good. We'll move on to the other side, eh? So for the time being over here, I think I'll remove this turbo intake pipe just so I can see what I'm doing. There isn't much chance of a clash between the two pipes here like there was on the other side. Generally everything's much simpler over here. I don't know how I'm going to go with this bend behind the engine mount here, but we will see. A little bit of progress, folks. You can see I've got a 90-degree silicon coupler fitted to the charge pipe of the turbo. Guy just wraps right around behind the engine mount there. Comes out here. Beautiful. So from there we've got about 80mm of straight pipe. Then we've got the remnant of a bend that I've just cut off in the appropriate position on the bend to give me the right angle and the right position in the bend. Obviously if you go on an angle across a bend, you're going to change the length of the pipe, so you have to always be, when you do your cuts, and I've got sort of a bit of a protractor I've drawn on my bench that I use to just sort of tell me rough angles, just so that when you do your cuts, you know, you follow that arc of the bend around, so they're always square off the bend, so they give you a finished cut that you can mate up to a piece of square pipe, a piece of pipe that's been cut at 90 degrees, you know, and it'll fit perfectly. Otherwise, it's just a fuck up. Like, you'll never do it. So you've always got to be aware of that when you're adjusting mandrel bends to give you different angles, that you always have to be square off the angle. So that being said, that's what I've done here. This was just an offcut. I think it was an offcut from a 45. It looks like it's about a 10. It's ended up being about a 10 degree bend, and then I have a 45 degree bend here that I've just cut the leg off, and I'm about to tack that into that position there. And you can see that's starting to give me what I need. I've got a little bit of an issue here with this being slightly too high. And the pipe wants to kind of rock over, but I do have another bend that I can fit in here and try and correct this angle, but it may actually be okay. It's not too bad. So at the least, I can tack this pipe in position here, and we'll see how it goes. So that's what I'm just about to do now. I'm about to pull this all back out, put a couple of tacks in this, and then reassess it. So our next piece is tacked in. Just refit it. Refit and reassess. Well, at this stage I think that's actually pretty good. It's clear for me turbo oil drain down here, which you probably can't see, but there's a turbo oil drain that runs into the Z1 oil pan spacer I've got on there. And it's clear from the pipes. There's a few other little electrical connectors and things. These pipes for the transmission are clear. I may be ditching these though and making up some new lines for this. I don't know, I've got to suss that out. That's actually not too bad at all. I think I'm happy enough with that I can weld it out. I think that's the go, folks. I may have to have a bit of a fiddle with this. I'll see how it works. You can see the pipe on the other side comes out at about 90 degrees, sort of straightforward. Now that doesn't have to be like that, that's just how it's ended up with working the bends and where I could get the last bend on there and all that sort of stuff. But because this side's started in on a better angle, I can sort of come out here. I don't know, I'll suss it out. I might be able to just leave it like that. At least it means that there's less of a bend going into the intercooler on this side, but we'll see. I'm also trying to keep everything sort of symmetrical as possible, and that even goes for things like bends and restrictions and stuff. So if there's, obviously with any V configuration engine, you don't want one side of the engine flowing better than the other side of the engine. You want both sides of the engine roughly flowing the same amount of air and all that kind of stuff, which can vary with the amount of restriction that you have in your piping on either side of the engine. Not a huge difference though, I must say, but where you can, it's always good to try and match things and keep them kind of symmetrical, just to minimize the differences between the two banks. So I'll weld that out and I'll refit the intake to the turbo and then have a little bit of a think about what I'm going to do next. We'll get this finished, put that pipe back on, and I'll see where that takes me. Alright folks, bear with me, I'll just weld this out. And there we go, folks. Another one done. And bloody tastic. Rightio, let's go. put it on the car. Hopefully, you should be looking pretty bloody good. Where's my depth mark? I'll just put a new depth mark on. Alrighty. I think that is pretty bloody good. Throw this guy back on over the top. And we are starting to look something like something now, folks. I'll just take this bloody camera walkies so we can get a bit more of a look. So there we go. There's our 90 sneaking around behind the engine mount there. Coming straight off the outlet of the compressor. Coming down under there. Sitting there ready to possibly have another piece put onto that one. Not sure at the moment. It's original bead roll. Actually, they're pretty good, the bead rolls on the 2-inch pipe. They're way better than the 2.5. They'll have to be cut off. Obviously, when piping's finished, I'll just then pull it out and just bead roll all the ends and everything like that. At this point, all the bead rolls do is they just give you the shits. It's hard enough getting the pipes in and out of the silicon couplers. When you're working on the stuff, let alone having a bloody bead on the end of it, it just makes them impossible. You really don't want to be frigging around with stuff that's got bead rolls on it. So yes, as you can see, we're starting to get a few pipes here and there coming off the old girl. So I think the next thing I'll do is drop the body shell back down, give everything a bit of an overall check. Pretty confident in it though. And then I'll pump this up as high as I can, and I'll start doing a bit of set out on the intercooler stuff where it sort of all starts to sort of come together. Where the body shell and the intercooler meets this, I'll start looking at joins, etc, etc. And once I get something concrete, I'll give you guys a bit of a look. Alright folks, the body's back down. Time to have a little bit of a look and see how everything went. Driver's side. There's our pipes poking out, ready for a little bit more work. In the engine bay. Where are they? Oh, there they are. Okay, you can just, well, you can't see the lower pipe really. It's obscured by the intake for the turbo. But we all know it's there. Right, there you go. You can just kind of see it down there, sort of. Passenger side, bit easier. You can sort of see everything a bit easier there. You can see the charge pipe on the bottom, the intake pipe at the top, sort of snaking out of the turbo there. And then poking out under there. All looking very nice. So I think I might leave this episode there, folks. I've got a little bit of thinking to do on how I'm going to move forward with joining the all the piping up to the intercooler and everything. I have a little bit of work to do on the intercooler. I'm going to slightly modify the brackets that I made a couple of years ago on this setup. I'd like to rubber mount the intercooler. The brackets just mount to the chassis, and then the intercooler solid mounts to the brackets that I made, which is the way that most of the commercial companies who do intercoolers on these things for the turbo kits in the US run them. However, I would like to rubber mount it. I'm a little bit concerned about having something tied between the two front chassis rails and the vehicle flexing and sort of, you know, fatiguing the intercooler or fatiguing the brackets. So it's a fairly easy thing to do. I've got some rubber mounts here that'll be perfect. It just means I've got to slightly modify the bracket. I want to get that done before I start laying out any of the pipes to the intercooler. So obviously that's a little bit of work. So what I'll probably do is get into that and either show you guys the result or show you as I'm going along in the next video. But as I say, I think I might leave it there. So if you like the work that I'm doing here, folks, remember to give the video a bit of a thumbs up, a bit of a like, Leave a comment, subscribe to my channel if you'd like to see more of my stuff. I do quite a variety of content, all based around making stuff, cars, workshop machinery, all sorts of crap. But I always do my best, guys. So if you're interested in any tips from the Aussie shed, you must come back. So as always, thanks for watching. Always good having yous here, especially on these late bloody nights when I'm out here in the shed. And I will see you guys on the next one. Cheers.